now, so I guess I won't use it. Thank you for coming today. I'm Bill Jacoby. As Will said, I'm the editor of the American Journal of Political Science. I'm a professor of political science at Michigan State University. Am I correct in assuming most of you are not political scientists, right? Most of you aren't. I wouldn't expect here. Wait a minute, now the clicker did start working. Well, no, it didn't. I must have hit that. Anyway, a little bit of background here. When Will said he had a panel of experts, I thought of myself and I sort of chuckled about myself because I don't really think of myself as an expert in this general field here, other than being somebody who's had quite a bit of experience with it in sort of within the trenches, in the practical form. A few years ago, from 2001 to 2004, I was editor of another political science journal, the Journal of Politics. And in political science, we like to think of the top 3 journals in our discipline as the American Political Science Review, the American Journal of Political Science, and the Journal of Politics. And so I was editor of the Journal of Politics from 2001 to 2004. I believe I'm correct in saying that I was the first political science journal editor to establish a website for the journal. And part of the reason for establishing the website was because I wanted to encourage authors to submit replication materials and supplemental materials for the work that they published in the JOP. During the 4 years I was editor, one person submitted replication data. And in the end, it didn't really matter because when I passed the editorship along to the next editor decided he wasn't going to continue the website. So the data disappeared into the mists of cyberspace someplace. 10 years later, how things have changed when I became editor of the American Journal of Political Science, and that's pretty much the point at which I'll pick it up here. I also mentioned I spent 7 years as director of a summer program at the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research, which is one of the biggest data repositories in the social science world, if not the biggest data repository. And while I was on the educational side, training side of things there, you can't help but to have a little bit of osmosis from the data curation and preservation sides and data transparency, so I learned a little bit about it there. But what I really want to talk about is the American Journal of Political Science. Of course, the objectives of science and the objectives of the American Journal of Political Science as a scientific journal are to generate and test powerful theories of political and social phenomena by presenting to the scientific community rigorous and cumulative research efforts. Science is inherently a social enterprise, something that doesn't always seem obvious at the outset, but nevertheless it is. And an integral part of the social aspect of science is the fact that progress within any scientific field can only occur when researchers within that field have access to the procedures, to the tools, to the data, to the results, to everything involved in the process that was used to generate the existing state of knowledge within that field. The American Journal of Political Science, I'm happy to say, is taking a leadership role in establishing a research-conducive environment within the political science discipline. I hope I'm working to this myself, but I'm only picking up on things that previous editors have done before me, so I'm not trying to do credit claiming here in saying these things. Of course, the main thing that we're trying to do is publish great scientific work. The American Political Science Review claims to be the flagship journal in the political science discipline. Those of us in the know that the American Journal of Political Science is the best journal in the discipline. Hopefully I won't screw that up during my term as editor. But of course, publishing great scientific work, but at the same time, what I want to do is make sure that interested researchers have access to the raw material that generated the work that appears in the American Journal of Political Science. I'm making this one of the primary objectives of my editorship during the time I have the journal. It seems to me that doing so is the only way to establish and confirm the quality of evidence-based claims within the social science research community, which, again, is what all of this is about. Now, how are we doing this? Back when I was at the Journal of Politics in the process of being selected as journal, I don't think I had to do it in the process of being selected for the American Journal of Political Science, but I made a comment at one point that I truly believe that journal editors are the guardians of their respective disciplines. And I said that sort of tongue-in-cheek. I wanted a pithy comment to the selection committee. But I have to say, I believe that. I think it stands on our shoulders as the primary, the managers of the primary means of communicating scientific knowledge to oversee the process and make sure that the process is doing what it is supposed to do. So I take, as I said, very seriously the leadership role of the American Journal of Political Science in establishing a research-conducive environment. One of the ways that I'm doing this through the journal is to make public commitments to best practices in the areas of research transparency, data accessibility, and replicability of results. There is, I think Will has already mentioned this, and I think Colin's going to talk about it as well, the Data Access and Research Transparency Initiative, the DART initiative in the social sciences. This is a broad statement of principles. It was initially issued by 5 journal editors, of whom I was one, in October 2014, and by last count, it is endorsed by 26 political science journals. There's a website that provides the particulars of this, and again, it's just a general statement of principles that tries to establish a commitment to best practices on data access and research transparency. Just last week, I signed on to the Transparency and Openness Promotion Guidelines, or the TOP guidelines. This is a template of policies that journals can adopt to encourage transparency and reproducibility of scientific results. There is an Information Commons, basically a website, and there's apparently a forthcoming article in Science as well. So what I'm trying to do is get the word out there that this is an official commitment of the American Journal of Political Science. We believe in these principles, and we expect the people who want their work published in the American Journal of Political Science to adhere to these principles as well. In addition to that, and I guess you would say, in a sense of putting my money where my mouth is, the American Journal of Political Science has what I believe to be the most rigorous replication policy in any of the social sciences at this point. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think so. As I said, I'm not the first one to raise these principles at the AJPS. For many, many years, probably for many decades, I think it's fair to say many decades, authors of American Journal of Political Science articles have been asked to provide their data for replication purposes. But compliance was entirely voluntary. And so as a result, the availability and the quality of replication materials for most of that time varied enormously. And here I have to admit that some of my earlier work, I'm one of the offenders there, that I didn't make material as available as I probably should have. The person who preceded me as AJPS editor, Rick Wilson from the university, from Rice University, established a new policy in 2013. He required that authors of articles published in the AJPS must upload replication files to the AJPS Dataverse within the Harvard Dataverse Network, as Marseille talked about just a few moments ago. The problem was that there's just no real guidance, or there was no real guidance about what information and materials should be provided. This seems like sort of a curious oversight, but the American Journal of Political Science gets approximately 1,000 submissions a year, so I can tell you from personal experience that the editor spends most of his or her time paying attention to other things than shepherding replication materials, no matter how important the editor believes doing that is. But the result was that while the AJPS Dataverse has been in existence for a while, the content of the replication files continued to vary quite a bit across different articles. Well, this is one thing that I really tried to change. Over the last year, I've tried to make changes in this by producing 2 what I believe to be very, very important innovations in the replication policy at the AJPS. First, and this seems like an enormously obvious step, we created a new document informing authors of exactly what information they're expected to provide and upload to the Dataverse. Our document's called the AJPS Guidelines for Preparing Replication Files. We make this available on the AJPS website, and the author of every accepted article, when I send him or her the acceptance message, I provide the link to this document there as well, so they should all have it. Admit at the outset that the guidelines probably will not cover every situation that arises. The guidelines currently are oriented primarily toward quantitative research efforts, and I don't want them to stay that way. Colin and I have talked about taking steps very soon in the future, when we have time to do it, to extend them to cover qualitative data and qualitative studies as well. But first things first in terms of what I could do quickly. That being said, the guidelines that we have now have proven to be sufficient for most of the data analyses that get reported in AJPS articles. And here our objective is to establish a general standard for the information that has to be made available. Now, The guidelines specify what we want, and when you see what we ask for, they're going to seem immediately obvious. It certainly seemed obvious to me what would go into a good replication file, but you would be amazed at the authors who apparently don't have the same idea about this. So, for example, we tell authors, provide us with a README file that explains and lists and explains the other files that you provide for us. What we would get in the past would be a set of files with opaque file names, and presumably the user, the would-be replicator, was expected to figure out herself. The analysis data set, well, most people provided the analysis data set and a code book describing the contents of the data set. I had an incident a couple of months ago, where a graduate student requested information that was actually contained on the Dataverse, the AJPS Dataverse, but the authors had uploaded the data set and had not included a code book, so it was impossible to tell what the contents of the data set were. I wrote to the author, asked the author to provide the information to the graduate student, or through me, provide the information to the graduate student. The author did this and provided a file that was essentially a file of zeros and ones with no explanation of what the variables were or anything like that. So this is exactly the kind of situation we're trying to avoid by providing these guidelines. I'm happy to say that author eventually came through and provided the information as well. What we want also is clear and detailed code that enables interested researchers to replicate all tables, figures, and exhibits in AJPS articles. Here again, there were many instances where people would send in their R code or their stata commands without explaining what these commands did, why they did the things that they did, or what they were expected to produce relative to the article itself. So this is not terribly helpful. And let me just close that there, because I don't think we want to update Adobe Reader at this point. So we're now asking that people provide code and comments in the code to let us know what's going on there. We want information about the source of the analysis data set. The data set that you analyzed, we want you to provide directly to us, but we want to know about where this came from and what you did to create the data set, that you actually used for your analysis in there. Again, authors can request exemptions from the general replication policy. If an author uses restricted data of some sort, if there are data that are provided by a source that has individual respondent identifiers, for example, data from Statistics Sweden provides, the Swedish researchers, for example, are not allowed to possess the data themselves, so they have difficulty meeting our strict replication guidelines. We have exceptions for this. We have ways of dealing with it. It's not a one-size-fits-all set of exceptions, so we deal with those on a case-by-case basis. And so far we've had, first of all, not too much call for exceptions, but those exceptions that have arisen we've handled pretty easily. But the idea here is that we have a set of guidelines where a set of guidelines didn't exist previously. So now when authors provide us with files, we can say, no, we need, thank you for what you gave us, but here's what else we need. And we have a policy that details this. So that's the first important innovation, providing these guidelines here. The second important innovation is that now we actually verify the materials to make sure that these materials really do reproduce the analysis results. Verification is carried out by the archive staff at the University of North Carolina's Odom Institute for Research in Social Science. And authors are informed upon acceptance of their manuscript that final acceptance and publication is contingent upon successful replication of their analyses. We don't replicate, we don't publish. And that's a firm rule that certainly during my editorship I intend to follow for all articles. I want to acknowledge that this is not a cheap or easy process, and the only reason that I can do this, and probably a major reason that other journals haven't adopted this, is because they don't have the support that I do from the Midwest Political Science Association and from Will Morgan. So I acknowledge that very openly, and every opportunity I get, I express my gratitude for this. It's something that's having an enormous, is going to have an enormous impact on the social sciences. In any case, verification of replication materials is now a regular component of the publication workflow. When I accept an article for publication, the author gets an email message in which I say, congratulations, I've accepted your article, here are the remaining things I want you to do, and I also instruct the author to upload replication files to the AJPS Dataverse at the same time that the final draft of the manuscript is submitted. We will not consider the final draft of the manuscript until the replication files have been uploaded to the Dataverse. When they're uploaded to the Dataverse, I inform the Odom staff The ODM staff verifies that the full set of replication files are there and that they actually do what they're supposed to do. If problems occur, the ODM staff informs me, and I inform the author, and the process begins again. Presumably, the author resolves the issues that the staff identifies, lets me know that he or she has replaced the problematic content, and I send it on to the ODM staff for rechecking, and this process continues until the replication is finally carried out successfully. The process is new, so I don't have a whole lot of data on how it's working, but we have a little bit. To go back a little bit in the record, the AJPS Dataverse was first announced in July 2012. This was by my predecessor. This was before I became editor. It was announced in July 2012, but the first study, set of replication files, wasn't released for public use until September 2013. So that's the length of time for the publication process. Currently, just a couple of days ago, the AJPS Dataverse contains 184 data sets. And as Mercedes said, data sets are what used to be called studies on the AJPS Dataverse. Each one of those data sets represents an AJPS article for which replication materials are available. Our new policy was announced very recently, back on March 26th, 2 months and 2 days ago, 2015. And as of May 15th, when I got my last report from the ODM staff, they've worked with the replication materials for 21 accepted manuscripts. Of those, 13 of them have been released, meaning they went through the full replication process and the staff were able to successfully replicate the results. And these are now available on the AJPS Dataverse. Those manuscripts whose replication materials have not yet been successfully replicated, they're the draft data sets on the AJPS Dataverse, so they're not available yet, and those manuscripts have not proceeded in the publication process. It's putting it mildly to say that the initial replication files provided by the authors usually need additional work. Almost every author has needed to correct and resubmit their replication files one or more times. The mean number of resubmissions is 1.38. It varies. The high end is 3. I think the modal number is 1 resubmission, but there have been only 2 cases out of 21 in which the replication files were successfully able to reproduce all the analyses on the first try. Now, what happens is authors overlook things. They forget to include the code for a given figure or something like that. There's nothing nefarious going on as far as we can tell. It's, scatterbrainedness, and I think the consequences of the fact that this is not something that we're taught to do systematically when we learn to be social scientists, and hopefully that's something that's going to change as this goes on. The verification process does add some time to the publication workflow, so the number of days from the arrival of the data set at the ODM Institute, so when I send it to the ODM Institute, until the release of the Dataverse data set, for those 13 that have been released so far, the number of days ranges from 8 to 50, and the mean is 29.15, so almost a month. It adds about a month there. Now, a lot of that time is actually not due to the ODM Institute and the verification process on our end. It's the authors who are taking time. The number of days from the arrival at the ODM Institute of the initial replication files to the initial verification report only varies from 1 to 20 days, and the mean there is almost 12 days. So the ODM Institute works very, very quickly. This is, again, all this is taking place after the article has been accepted, so the author isn't sitting on the edge of his or her seat waiting to find out what's going on with this. We have a backlog of publications anyway, so this really doesn't delay much of anything. So as far as I'm concerned, the benefits of the verification process far, far outweigh any costs whatsoever to the author, to the editor, or to the publisher. Because in the end, once this gets verified, the data get a DOI of their own that's matched to the article's DOI, and even as we speak now, the publisher, Wiley, is establishing reciprocal linkages between the DOIs so that an interested researcher can seamlessly work back and forth between the data and the article for the verification and hopefully advancement of scientific objectives with these things. So I like to think, and I hope others agree, that the new AJPS replication policy makes an important contribution to the infrastructure of social science research. We have traditionally paid lip service to the standards of research transparency and replicability of results. We're taught this from our first days in graduate school, and for me that goes back many, many decades up to this point. But this new policy that we're adopting for the first time, I believe, requires us to actually practice what we preach in meaningful and important ways here. I hope that, given the prominence of the American Journal of Political Science, we can serve as a role model in a way that really does promote and facilitate transparency, in social scientific research, and through that improves the integrity of social science research more generally. And as Will said, there's been an incident just over the past 10 days or so that verifies enormously the importance of doing this. And I have to tell you that when this came to the fore, it literally exploded on the scene a week ago last Tuesday. I wiped my brow and said, thank heavens for the timing of the announcement of our replication policy. The new replication policy, we hope, should contribute directly to a more rigorous, to a more rational, theory-driven, and cumulative approach to understanding political and social phenomena. And after all, that's the name of the game in science, so I hope what we're doing really is contributing to the quality of political science and social sciences more generally. So, thank you.